Chapter 3 Jack of All Trades. After receiving the pop-up, Harry felt a connection to the new cat, or Flurkin as she was apparently called. Harry was more than a little concerned since he had every textbook Hogwarts required on magic beasts and Flurkin was not listed in any of them. Through the connection he felt Goose's intention. Which of course translated to, "Carry me human." Harry had to stifle a smile at that one. If given a human voice, Harry imaged it would be that of a upper society middle-aged woman. He purchased a nice carrier for Goose who easily entered thinking, acceptable, for now. With that Harry had finished his shopping for school supplies. Harry was tempted to get some ice cream at that place across from Gringotts but he didn't want to push his luck. Harry instead lifted Goose's carrier and returned to the Leaky Cauldron and headed for London. Once back among the streets of the mundane, Harry realized he didn't really have much to do for the next 5.5 weeks besides put the entire Potter library into his inventory. Ping. New quest, Jack of All Trades, acquire 4 different paths, get each of the 4 paths to rank 5. Harry raised an eyebrow before shrugging in acceptance. That worked. His Scholar and Warrior paths were both pretty close to rank 5 and he had confidence in getting them up soon. A 4th path however would be tricky. He actually had no ideas what paths were possible. Crafter was probably a path, but getting that to level 5 in a month wasn't likely. There was probably a path for businessmen but he'd have to make a lot of money really fast to level that one up. Might be possible but he hoped for something better. While Harry was standing there, someone bumped into him and said, "Watch it, kid." Harry looked up and was about to ask where the man's own eyes were but noticed him talking to himself. No, he was talking on a phone, one of those hand ones his uncle said he wanted. Harry wondered what would happen if he put something like that into his inventory. Goose meowed with the intention, "Feed me." Harry looked down and said, "What would you like?" Goose meowed and thought back, "Chicken." Harry thought the cat/Flurkin might be surprised that Harry was responding to it, but it seemed to this cat that this was nothing out of the ordinary. Kinda made Harry wonder what was out of the ordinary to her. Harry opened his map and found a grocery store a few blocks down and headed that direction. Harry still had most of the £300 minus the bus fare he started with, so getting cat food wouldn't be an issue. At this thought Harry realized something very odd. He wasn't hungry. His stomach felt empty, which was why he thought of ice cream earlier, sure, but the pain of hunger wasn't there. He figured he would address that after feeding his Flurkin. The store did in fact sell cat food and Harry was happy he found the kind made with real chicken. After purchasing a bunch of it along with a month worth of other flavors, Harry entered an alleyway free of witnesses and subtly conjured a plate. Conjuration was something he practiced more than any other discipline as he would often conjure weapons and shields while fighting monsters, so conjuring a plate wasn't an issue. He opened the food and set it on the plate before letting Goose out and saying, "Here you go, Goose." Goose meowed as she approached the food and conveyed through the bond, "Well done, human," before chowing down. Harry looked through his map of London while Goose finished eating. Those electronics were interesting. From how his mother described them, they were like Muggle magic, only more easily explained. If non-magicals could learn it, Harry figured he could too. On the map he saw a larger store he hoped would sell a few pieces of electronics and decided to head there next. 4 hours, 2 outlet stores, a trip back to Gringotts, and 2 bookstores later, Harry had what he needed and a headache. The first store that he asked for electronics at, he found that they had large things like TVs and small things like phones and lots of computers. Most of which was outside Harry's price range, so he had to return to Gringotts and get some of his galleons exchanged into British pounds. Harry then returned but went to a different outlet store that he heard had a better variety. Harry purchased a simple calculator, an expensive calculator, and something called a BlackBerry. After his purchase Harry placed them all into his inventory and found another problem. Harry could now tell exactly how each piece was put together and the number of screws within, and could even tell what information was stored within. The problem was that he still didn't know how any of it worked. The programming language was not one he knew, so he had to find a bookstore, which then directed him to another bookstore to buy a dozen books on the subject. What gave him a headache was that even after getting the books into his inventory, he still didn't know how the electronics worked. Sure, he could list off the contents of the books verbatim, but that didn't mean he understood it. It was like buying a book written in French then buying a book on French to English translation. Having both didn't immediately mean he could read the first book, as there was no automated cross-referencing. Harry sighed at how badly he underestimated the work needed to learn a new skill. He felt he could still do it, but he would have to do it consciously and not assume it would happen automatically for him. Once ready, Harry said to Goose, "We're heading home, but the ride won't be comfortable." Goose, who had been pleased to be chauffeured around the city after being in a cage for some time for some reason, expressed a sense of disbelief at Harry's comment. Something on the line of, "Oh really?" Harry initiated the port key that Rockshear gave him, which made him feel like he was being dragged by his belly button through a tornado at 200 kilometers an hour. When Harry saw the ground again, he set a stance and landed all right. He figured if he hadn't trained in martial forms he'd have landed on his butt. James had told him it would be uncomfortable, but Harry didn't feel too bad. He chalked it up to his gamer's body. Harry looked at Goose and said, "You alright?" Goose appeared completely unshaken and quite clearly conveyed back, "You've obviously never traveled by turning yourself inside out before." At that, Harry had to question whether or not his interpretation of Goose's messages were accurate. What kind of travel requires turning yourself inside out? Harry looked around the area that was his new home. It was a high-rise cliff face overlooking the sea. There was actually a break in the cliff face behind him which prevented this section from being approached on foot without advanced means. Harry took the ward key from his inventory and activated it. A moment later, the empty space revealed a 2-story Victorian-style house. Harry said, "This will be our new home for the next month, Goose." Goose seemed non-committal about it. Like she'd seen better but had seen worse as well. The house itself had a welcoming room, a living room with a fireplace, a dining room, a kitchen, and the downstairs had a guest room. The upstairs had the master bedroom and 3 other bedrooms along with the library and several bathrooms, of course. Harry went to the kitchen first and conjured a litter box and sand along with a plate and bowl. He used a weak water summoning charm to fill the bowl before letting Goose out and saying, "I'm going to look upstairs." Goose started drinking and Harry headed up to check the library. He was not disappointed as it had 7 bookshelves lining the walls with 6 rows of books each, all of which were full. One by one each was removed from the shelf and placed into his inventory. Contained within were family spells, historical events, alliances, and of course a highly detailed genealogical record. What surprised Harry and made him realize he would need to return to the bookstore later was the lack of an encyclopedia or dictionary. Harry returned to the living room and used a small incendio charm to ignite the fireplace before he sat on the comfy chair nearby. Harry was looking into space as his mind was actively going over the tech books he bought. He was tempted to pause, but he couldn't feel the warmth of the fireplace when time stopped, and if he paused he might be tempted to stay paused until he mastered everything, which was not a good idea. He needed to acclimate himself to a proper day and night cycles after all. His cross-referencing was interrupted by a warm fuzzball jumping onto his lap. After laying down, Harry heard Goose send the question, "Do you not eat?" Harry realized only then he had in fact forgotten to buy any food for himself during the whole day. That wasn't healthy, was it? Ping. FAQ updated: food and sleep. Your body can sustain itself on ambient energy and does not require sleep or nourishment. When injured or depleted of health, stamina, or magic reserves, eating and drinking can directly restore reserves or increase the rate of recovering. Sleeping can be initiated in a sleep environment and will automatically restore all depleted reserves after 4 hours if uninterrupted. After reading the conveniently timed pop-up, Harry answered Goose back, "I can eat, but I don't need to. I'm not a normal human." Goose shifted to get more comfortable and conveyed through the link, "If you're a normal human then I'm a normal house cat," as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Harry started petting Goose as he went back to learning the mysteries of a calculator. The fact that a calculator calculates base 10 math yet the programming seemed to be based off the number 8 was harder to work through than he thought. He was glad that his 3 times higher than an average adult stats seemed to let his mind brute force his way through the required comprehensions. It was about morning the next day he finally got what he was looking for. Ping. Tech path has risen to rank 1. Harry gave a content sigh that he finally had something of a foundation in tech. At least he knew how the basic calculator worked now. The advanced one, however, was about 50 times more complex and could even have additional functions manually programmed into it. Harry felt he could program something simple into it, but not much for the moment. However, he at least had some confidence he could do this. If nothing else, at least the lines of codes he knew were contained within the electronics were no longer complete gibberish. The problem now was that he was bored. He was no longer capable of looking at another line of code or tech book. He needed something else to break himself in. Harry opened up the menu and looked through the settings. This was a new feature which was grayed out during the tutorial and couldn't be adjusted. The settings included sound, visual, format, and controls. Sound settings actually allowed him to change the relative volume he heard of specific sounds such as voices, music, and other things. This meant that Harry could have a music player play at low volume and use the settings to increase the volume of what he heard while setting all other sounds to 0. He could even set everything to 0 and make himself deaf. He could already think of a few applications for deaf on demand. Format and controls simply showed how everything displayed and how he interacted with it. The control allowed for touch, voice, and mental controls, but to be safe Harry changed it to mental only so he didn't accidentally move or say something that could affect his pop-ups. Display however was far more than it initially looked. Pun intended. Harry could give himself nighttime vision by adjusting the lighting, though he'd have to manually change it back or he'd be blinded in the day. He could adjust specific colors or set it so that everything he saw was green. However, the function on the display setting that Harry found the most amazing was the energy sense prompt. Harry turned it on and suddenly he had a new sense. Harry himself was basically composed of energy imitating matter, and since he absorbed energy to live and could dominate and absorb energy to level up, he wondered why he couldn't sense it before. Now he could. In the space he felt more than a dozen distinct energy types, and there were likely hundreds more hidden below the surface. In his living room he felt 4 types that were more prevalent than others. The most common seemed to be the ambient energy of empty space. He had no idea what it really was or what it did though. The second most common was the heat energy coming from the fireplace. The third energy type actually originated from himself and seemed to be embedded in the house as well. This energy Harry did have a reference for from the Potter library. One of his great-great-uncles in the early part of the 20th century had studied physics and called this energy exotic energy. He said it occurred naturally in very small quantities in nature, specifically around ley lines, which he called intersections, though he did not reference what they were intersections of. Exotic energy changed the laws of physics slightly, though the more around, the greater the change. It was considered uncontrollable and a nuisance, yet witches and wizards not only controlled it, they naturally produced it as well. And of course the fourth energy in the living room came from Goose. This energy actually seemed similar to the ambient energy of empty space, it was just a different color. Harry looked at a few other items and concluded that other objects had very little energy within except for heat energy for temperature and exotic energy for some of the magical items. Harry took the simple calculator out of his inventory and noticed he could also sense electrical energy. He didn't see it with his eyes either, it was more of an awareness he gained. Harry wondered if it was a good idea to keep this on, as it could easily be a distraction, but decided it was too useful. He figured he always had this ability, but it had been turned off until now. Harry wondered what type of energies filled the tutorial area, as if that was the land of the dead, there wouldn't be empty space or heat, would there? Harry figured the reason this setting was off during the tutorial was that the only energy in the tutorial was death energy. Death energy was only good for the dead, and it would be better not to get used to feeling it for someone who was to return to life. At that realization Harry suddenly understood why his level went back to 1 after the tutorial completed. Besides necromancers and those who intended to desecrate the death energy wasn't compatible for living beings. Ding! Int +1. Intelligence has reached 40. Battle meditation unlocked. Okay, that was new. Harry opened up the new section of his menu and reviewed the details. It seemed Harry could enter a state where he could absorb ambient energy to level up, but doing so required dominating it, so within his trance the energy he absorbed would take the form of a monster and he would have to battle and defeat it on a mental plane to absorb it. Luckily if he lost he wouldn't die, but he would take damage, so he shouldn't do it unless healthy. Harry wondered who thought this system up and if they were a genius or insane. Harry decided to try it out and hope he didn't die. He was given a selection of energies to choose from, but it looked quite foreboding. Dimensional energy, recommended level 5200 heat energy, recommended level 110 exotic energy, recommended level 1030 Flurkin pocket dimensional energy, recommended level 250 300 time energy, recommended level 300 500. Harry glanced back down at the sleeping cat that apparently had a pocket dimension and again wondered what exactly it was. Harry selected heat energy of course and felt his mind clear and go far from his body. He found himself in a white, empty space that seemed quite hot. Harry noticed movement and saw a snake that appeared to be made of flames. According to one of the books Harry had in his internal library, it was a Ashwinder, though a small one. Harry used a weak, silent aqua eructo charm which summoned a stream of water from his hand and doused the flame snake. Although it was a 4th-year spell, the spell could be used at various levels of power, so Harry could use it at a low level for now. The Ashwinder was quick but the water spray was quite wide. It didn't douse right away, but Harry kept up the spell and before the snake could get any closer to Harry it died and dispersed into particles of light which Harry absorbed. 2 more Ashwinders approached and Harry had to move while casting. Harry tried to Findo at one of them which, although a second-year spell, in the 4th year they teach you how to make it stronger and Harry used the 4th-year version. The spell struck one of the snakes while the other got out of the way but the snake it cut in half continued slithering towards Harry. Harry decided to give up practicing his spells and just finish it for now. He used an extinguishing charm which basically was a one-hit kill for Ashwinders and started to grind in earnest. Mostly. The small Ashwinders barely gave any energy and it would likely take 2 hours for Harry to get to level 2. But since every level beyond 1 would protect him from dying a pointless death, it was worth it no matter how mind-numbingly boring. Goose woke up during Harry's battle meditation and noticed the heat from the fireplace going into the human. It was getting a bit too warm for comfort so she jumped off Harry and went to another couch which was on the other side of the fireplace. Suddenly a snake made of flames came out of the fireplace. The rug it slithered on was smoldering and Goose figured the human had no awareness of what he was doing. The Ashwinder's instincts were to find a dark place and lay eggs which would later erupt into flames. The fact that this may burn the house down wasn't something it cared for. Goose jumped in front of it which caused the Ashwinder to hiss a threat at the orange cat. Goose's mouth opened and over a dozen purple tentacles launched out, their total volume several times greater than Goose's. The Ashwinder recoiled back and tried to get away, but a moment later the tentacles had the fire snake wrapped up without getting burned and retracted back into the orange tabby cat. Goose burped with a small flame and thought it was spicy but not bad. For making her work, she wondered if she should scratch the human. However, she remembered the last human she scratched who still hadn't recovered and thought they were quite a fragile species. Then again this one wasn't a normal human. Goose decided she'd let it go this time but next time the human would get scratched. Harry got up an hour later after gaining a level and putting the stats toward Wisdom. Wisdom lowered the difficulty of spells and Harry had trouble using spells above 4th year with less than 40 Wisdom. Harry wondered how this translated to other people as he doubted that 5th year Hogwarts students all had wisdom enough to make the 4 times wiser than an average adult. He then noticed the scorch marks on the rug and asked Goose who was on the couch, "What happened?" Goose conveyed back, "The fireplace worked overtime because of you." An Ashwinder popped out. "I dealt with it this time. Now feed me lunch." The fact that Harry was being scolded by his pet, and he was now seriously questioning which of them was the pet, was disconcerting. The fact that his cat seemed to understand exactly what an Ashwinder was and how the fireplace could have produced one even more so. Harry felt he would regret asking how Goose dealt with it so didn't ask. That wise decision was thanks to his increased wisdom. Harry knew that Ashwinders were born of magic fires but fireplaces had safeties that prevented them usually. However, Harry absorbing its energy seemed to have had an effect. Harry got up and said, "Thank you, Goose. Now what would you like? Chicken, fish, or beef?" Goose approached the kitchen and answered back through their connection, "Beef." Harry opened 2 cans and set them on Goose's plate. Just like when Goose asked if Harry ate or this Ashwinder thing, both let Harry know Goose did in fact give a damn about him, even if it was only because Goose considered Harry her human. Harry spent the remainder of the day going back and forth between learning tech and battle meditation. When he went outside he found several other types of energy to absorb including sun energy, electromagnetic energy, and nature energy. Nature energy was for levels 540 and Harry found it a much better source than his fireplace as the nature energy monsters were normal animals similar to the monsters he faced in the tutorial and could be defeated with magic or conjured weapons. The levels of the monsters seemed to scale up with him, so after a few days he reached level 10. In order to add more variety to his time and because he felt guilty for not doing so already, Harry added physical exercise back into his routine. The village trainer had him do it every day but Harry had been slacking and now he felt bad about not taking advantage of what he had. In the tutorial, stamina would recover at a slow pace but here Harry could eat or sleep to restore it, meaning he could work out far more. Harry started pausing more and would use pause time to comprehend how tech worked until he couldn't take it anymore, then would go outside and use nature energy battle meditation, and once that was over he would exercise till he dropped and eat or sleep. Once he woke up he would pause and do it again. One of the more advanced practices Harry's parents insisted he learn was apparition. When needed Harry would apparate to London for groceries or another book or some tech gadget he wanted to figure out. Harry left the door open for Goose to enter and leave as she wished, which the Flurkin did take advantage of. 2 weeks after Harry started, he faced a small problem. The advanced calculator died. Harry had been spending time practicing his programming skills by trying to set up various things in the advanced calculator, including trying to make a simple video game. When Harry placed it back into his inventory, he noticed that the base programming code seemed corrupted. Harry had to go back to London and buy another and compare the two to get an idea of what happened. Unfortunately, the answer was what he had been fearing. Magic fried it. Harry knew exotic energies would change physics, but he wasn't using magic around the calculators. They were always in his inventory, which wasn't actually magic, so they weren't affected. Harry had only taken the BlackBerry out twice and it still worked, so that pretty much concluded that the inventory was not magic. After thinking about it for a while, Harry figured that the ambient exotic energy he was emitting was enough to fry it over time. This wasn't acceptable as it would prevent him from living properly in the non-magical world. Harry shifted through the spells in the grimoires in his inventory, and thanks to his INT getting to 75, Harry's speed of thought was faster than a computer's search engine. A 2004 computer anyways. He found 3 different possibilities. The first was a practice which would hide his magic, making him seem like a non-magical, though of course he couldn't cast magic in this state. He also found an experimental set of runes in one of his ancestors' grimoires that had an effect of expelling ambient exotic energy. If used on tech, it would prolong the shelf life as long as magic was not directly used on it. The last was a different set of runes that would freeze the state of something. If altered, it might prevent degradation due to exotic energy on tech. Harry would try for the first 2 for now and the third later, since the third required more experimentation. He had 3 more weeks until Hogwarts and didn't want to stop studying tech just because the castle would fry the ever-loving daylights out of anything more complex than a toaster. Harry also had the goal of getting to level 30 before Hogwarts, since he wanted at least 100 points in both wisdom and intelligence, with the rest going to agility. He wanted to have the spells for every year down as fast as he could, which would allow him to make the most of his Hogwarts time. Once Harry got into his groove, he was able to level up once or twice a day. Thanks to continued exercise and martial practice against monsters, Harry's martial path finally ranked up to 5, and many hours of studying various high school and college books got Harry's scholar path up to rank 5 as well. By the final week, Harry had gotten tech to rank 4, and since his third BlackBerry had a successful rune pattern inscribed, it could be used for practice without dying. BlackBerries 1 and 2 were not so fortunate. Harry spent pretty much the remainder of the last week entirely on tech. He regretted that his house had no phone line, because even if he could use a portable generator to charge things, he couldn't get a computer and the internet. At least for now. Ping. Tech path has risen to rank 5. Quest complete. Jack of all trades reward, Necklace of Chosen Path. Harry collapsed in mental exhaustion and let out an exasperated, and slightly overly dramatic, sigh of relief. Today was August 30th, so he finished with no time to spare. Since it was in his inventory, Harry knew what the necklace was and what it did. When he equipped it, he had to select a path, and the rank of that path would increase by 3. He could unequip it and re-equip to select the same or a different path. Very useful. The odd thing, however, was that he had no idea how it worked. Several of the books Harry bought had enchantments on them that prevented wear and tear, and while in his inventory, Harry understood these and could easily replicate them as long as he knew the steps used to make them. The same was true for the necklace he bought from the goblins that cast a glamour that changed his hair color. Harry could make his own now, though it wouldn't be easy. At least he felt he could brute force the process if need be. The new necklace, on the other hand, didn't give him any info on how it worked, and Harry couldn't think of any way to replicate the effect. Oh well. The next day, Harry got an empty trunk from a closet in the house and got Goose's carrier. He said to the Flurkin, "Today we're heading to Hogwarts, a magical school." Goose entered her carrier with a sassy meow that implied, "Watch me care less." Just watch me. Harry shook his head and wondered what kind of thing would have to happen for his cat to get interested in something. Harry set the ward key to hide the house again and apparat to King's Cross Station. He was wearing the goblin necklace, which for some reason he couldn't wear with the Necklace of Chosen Path. Harry figured it was a game thing, can't wear more than one necklace at the same time and all that. Harry scouted the location earlier, so he was able to apparate directly to the loading area, which thankfully didn't have anyone looking to question how an 11-year-old was apparating there to begin with. Each magical walking around contained a source of exotic energy according to Harry's new energy sense. The old-style train on the platform even had plenty of it infused into the frame itself. Deciding not to stall any longer, Harry took Goose and his empty trunk to the entrance of the train. And was stopped by a pop-up. Hogwarts Express ticket required for entry. Do you wish to use the ticket? Yes, no. Harry remembered the ticket he got with his letter, but it was still in his inventory. Harry had set the prompts to only work through thought to avoid accidents and thought aloud, yes. A moment later Harry felt the exotic energy trace on the ticket change. Before he could take another step forward, he was confronted by yet another pop-up. Dungeon generation active. You are about to enter Hogwarts. Please select difficulty. Easy, normal, hard, hell rewards scale to match difficulty. Harry's only thought was, what the hell? Hell difficulty selected. No. Harry had to prevent himself from crying out. Chapter 4 Welcome to Hogwarts. Harry left the train and station through the hidden gate and re-entered 3 times before giving up. The pop-up didn't return, meaning he either had to drop out or accept his doom. He was moderately leaning towards the former, but he had no other plans, and according to wizarding law, things would get very complicated for him if he didn't go to Hogwarts now that he was 11. Deciding to accept his fate, Harry picked up his empty trunk and goose and boarded the train. He was an hour early, which was the main reason no one noticed him operating, which was entirely the point of arriving early. Thanks to that, he also found a number of empty compartments and picked one out before letting Goose out of her carrier. She jumped on the seat next to Harry, whose life was slowly passing before his eyes, and he approached his inevitable death. About half an hour in, Harry heard a scratching sound at the door, which Goose noticed as well and conveyed, "Open the door." Harry got up to do so, and a fluffy orange cat outside took a peek inside before spotting Goose and jumping on the seat next to her. A moment later a bushy-haired girl came up the hallway dragging her trunk and said, "Crookshanks. You can't just run off like that." Through the bond, Harry asked Goose if this was a friend, and Goose conveyed back that Crookshanks was her old roommate from the store. Harry wondered if he was a flirkin for a moment before dismissing the idea. Harry's energy sense showed a trace amount of exotic energy in the cat, meaning it was at least partially magical, but it had none of the pocket dimensional energy Goose had. Harry looked back to the newcomer and said, "It seems our cats already know each other." Harry held out his hand and said, "I'm Harry." The girl saw as well that her cat was sitting next to the smaller orange cat and let out a sigh of relief. She noticed Harry's hand and took it before shaking and said, "I'm Hermione." Harry looked at Hermione's trunk and said, "Would you like to come in?" Hermione hesitated for a moment, but seeing her own cat sitting next to Harry's seemed as good a reason as any to accept. "All right, just let me get my trunk." Harry, being the gentleman of course, got up to lift her trunk onto the overhead rack. Although he was strong, he was still surprised at the weight of the luggage. Of course not as surprised as Hermione was seeing him lift a trunk with over a dozen books with a single arm like it was made of styrofoam. For the first time Harry noticed that Hermione was in her robes. His father had told him that he needed to wear his robes when he entered the castle, but he also said the train ride was going to be 9 hours long. In order to break the ice, Harry said, "Can I ask why you're wearing your robes?" Hermione took a breath and spoke with a matter-of-fact nuance, "Well, we're supposed to be wearing our robes for the first day." Harry smirked and said, "Which is 9 hours from now. Will you sleep in your robes tonight if your first class is 8 hours from bedtime?" "Well, no, of course not, you wouldn't sleep in your robes." Harry inferred that she didn't get the point he was trying to make and that pushing it might have the opposite effect. Hermione decided to make an attempt at conversation and asked, "Are you from a wizard family or muggleborn?" Harry's clothing was plain and just a little old-fashioned, so he could pass as either a pure blood in casual garb or a muggleborn with fine taste. He answered plainly, "Neither. I am an anomaly, an aberration, a tear in reality and a magnet of impending doom." "You have been warned." After a moment of contemplation Hermione rebutted, "That's not a very good joke." Harry shrugged his shoulders and said, "Just preparing you for what is to come. I hope you're not a fan of rules and common sense, because neither are on speaking terms with me." She looked partially offended and said, "What do you have against rules?" Harry said, "Nothing, it's them that seem to have something against me. You know how things are supposed to work certain ways, like they always have and always will. Those things take one look at me and tend to explode." "That doesn't make any sense," she accused. Harry smiled, "Nope. Thus is my life. Anyways, have you read any of the books yet?" Deciding not to argue with the change of subject, she answered happily, "Of course. My birthday is in September, so I got my letter 11 months ago and have spent that time reading as much as I can. It's all quite fascinating. Have you read the material?" Harry wondered how she would feel if he told her he hadn't read any of the books but knew all their content by heart. Deciding to lie, Harry said. Yes, I've gone through them all. Far too structured for my taste though. What's wrong with structure? In the mundane world, not much. But aren't we on a magical train about to head to a magic school in a magic castle to learn magic? Structure seems a bit out of place if you ask me. The door opened and a shy-looking young lad with brown hair and a bowl cut asked, "Do you mind if I sit with you?" Harry scooted over and said, "Not at all." "Thanks," he answered back before dragging his case inside and setting it on the rack. He looked over at the two orange cats and said, "Are those yours?" Harry was tempted to answer sarcastically but felt it might scare him away. Instead he answered, "Yup, mine's the orange one." Hermione rolled her eyes but couldn't keep herself from smirking. She answered back while pointing at the larger fluffier one, "That's Crookshanks, he's half Kneasel." Harry pointed at his and said, "That's Goose, she's a flurkin." Hermione frowned at the unfamiliar term and asked, "What's a flurkin?" Harry shrugged and said, "No idea, but this one looks exactly like a cat." The new boy looked confused and Hermione said to him, "I'm not sure if he's joking." She straightened up and said, "I'm Hermione Granger." Neville Longbottom. Both turned to Harry and said, "I'm Harry." Hermione noticed that he hadn't given his family name before when he introduced himself earlier and asked, "What's your full name?" "Harry James something or other." "Haven't used it before, so no point in starting before we get to Hogwarts." Harry recognized Neville's name as his parents said they were friends of the Longbottoms and wondered what they were like. Hermione wasn't pleased with the non-answer but after several exchanges was already getting used to Harry. Neville turned back to the cats and said, "I was going to bring a toad my gran bought for me but I couldn't find it this morning. My gran said she'd find it and mail it to me but I'm not sure if it isn't just better to leave him home." Harry asked, "Do you plan on being an apothecary or potion master?" Neville shook his head, "Merlin, no, I like plants but I don't think I'd be good at anything like that." "Then it would probably be better to leave the toad." Hermione asked, "Why?" Harry answered, "Toads have 100 or so uses as potions ingredients and skilled potion masters raise their own on specific diets which changes the properties of these ingredients. In other words, a pet toad is practice for raising them for ingredients later." Hermione gasped, "That's barbaric." Harry shrugged, "Not really. Some magical ingredients can't be used on their own as their properties are far too harsh. If fed in small quantities to the right kind of toad over a period of time, some of the toad's organs would gain these properties and are far more mild to use in a potion. Many lives have been saved through the sacrifice of a toad. What mundane scientists do to mice when studying drugs is much worse." Neville was partly intrigued and partly disturbed while Hermione was mostly confused. She asked, "Where did you learn that?" "Most Potenti Potions Volume 3. Only available through direct ordering." "Can I borrow it?" she asked. Harry answered, "Not until Christmas break, I'm afraid. The book has many things the school would not appreciate young children reading, and if you were caught reading it by a teacher it would most certainly be confiscated." Hermione's scandalized look almost made Harry burst into laughter but he successfully suppressed it while thinking of a plan. After realizing where the girl's priorities lie, Harry figured he could corrupt her to the dark path of rule-breaking with the proper incentives. Harry said, "Hermione, there is no skipping grades in magic school and there is no real benefit given to any student for reading ahead or doing better than others. Because of that, they won't allow you to learn beyond what they think you should. In other words, you're not going to be allowed to learn lots of things until they think the rest of your age group is ready, despite how far ahead of them you are." Before Hermione could explode, Neville said, "Wait, my gran said students who do well are rewarded." Hermione latched on to that and said, "That's right. Hogwarts A history says each house has an hourglass filled with gemstones which fill out when points are given for achievements." Harry smiled and answered back, "Hermione, I've read Hogwarts, A history as well. First place at the end of the year gets the house cup. Now tell me, according to Hogwarts, A history, what are the benefits of winning the house cup? What advantage does that house gain over the second, third, and last place houses?" Hermione frowned and seemed to be thinking furiously. Harry gave it to the count of 10 before continuing, "As I said, there is no real benefit to learning ahead. This means that the teachers not only won't help you, they will actively hinder you if you try to rush ahead of your year. There is only one way to learn at the pace you want." It only took a moment of hesitation before Hermione took the bait and asked, "What way?" Harry smiled innocently and said, "Ignore the teachers and teach yourself, of course." Neville asked, "Are you going to do that?" Harry answered back, I've acquired the textbooks for all 7 years and I've read them all and practiced up to 3rd year. I want to master 4th year content before November. Hermione looked like she wanted to say something, but the twisted logic Harry infected her with prevented her from coming up with a reason why that was not allowed. Harry gave her an olive branch and said, "Hermione, if you have any questions about what you read or any request to learn things from other years, all you have to do is ask." Hermione had little choice but to give in to temptation and proceeded to ask question after question on many of the things she couldn't figure out and some of the things she wanted to learn that were not available until later years. Neville was almost tempted to break out a parchment and quill just listening to the pair, as Harry was a very good teacher. Right before the train left, the door opened and a redhead peered in and saw 3 kids and 2 cats and closed the door. Harry didn't let it bother him and continued walking Hermione through some of the theories and practices that he learned, discovered on his own, or found in some of the journals or grimoires of his library. Hermione was in no way used to being the one asking questions and learning from someone of her own age group. She was always the useful one, the one others relied on, and Harry seemed to take that away from her. That feeling, however, vanished quickly as she was learning with greater speed than hours of reading and rereading had done for her before. So many things which had stumped her before now made perfect sense. After that she subconsciously stopped treating Harry like a peer and started thinking of him as a teacher. That way she was still the smartest of her peers. The main reason Harry was capable of explaining something he never taught before was the autocorrection assist of his scholar path, which subconsciously provided him with the appropriate means to teach the subject. The scholar path was the path of both the student and the teacher and increased the rate he could absorb, understand, and accurately impart knowledge. Some time after the train departed, Neville started asking questions once he knew Harry had lots of knowledge on potions and herbology. Although he was actually just referencing and cross-referencing different books and theories, Harry still sounded professional in his answers and theories on how specific processes worked, though truth was that the last plant he touched was the weeds he had to pull out of Petunia's yard. When Goose asked for food, Harry took his trunk out and opened it facing him, and with his hand hidden in it he pulled out some food for Goose and Crookshanks from his inventory. Harry didn't want to conjure plates in front of Neville and Hermione, so he just opened the cans and set them in front of the cats. Hermione thanked Harry and continued leeching the secrets of the universe from his noggin. At some point the train whistle could be heard, which meant they would arrive in 15 minutes. Harry got his trunk once more and left the compartment for a moment before confirming the hall was empty and simply equipping his robes from the inventory. When Harry entered he saw Neville was just placing his robes over his other clothes, which Hermione seemed less inclined to care about even though it was an infraction of the rules. Harry was quite pleased he was able to seduce her to the dark side successfully. Now he must get her to play a prank on a teacher. Ping. New quest, Heir of the Marauders, get Hermione Granger to play a prank on a teacher before the end of the school year. He was joking. Harry internally sighed that such a quest would pop up, but the rewards for his quests in the mortal plane had been good so far and he kinda wanted to do it anyways, so might as well. Harry moved to lift Hermione's trunk off the rack, but Neville said, "Leave it, Harry, they'll move our stuff to our rooms later." Harry wondered if whoever was going to move his things would question the weight, or lack thereof, but there was no point in considering it. The sun had already dipped below the horizon and the stars shone around the smiling crescent moon which hung over the castle in the distance. Fur's years over here." Harry recognized the man his mum described as Hagrid bellow out for them to gather around him. Once assembled he led them to the lake shore where there were 10 boats, each glowing in Harry's senses with a concentration of exotic energy. "4 to a boat, come on now." Harry, Hermione, and Neville loaded themselves up, but the boat didn't move. Eventually the red-headed boy Harry noticed on the train earlier hopped in and the boat started moving. Harry's energy sense was working overtime as through the water, he felt the presence of an enormous mass and tentacles. A giant squid? The Potters certainly forgot to mention this. They passed under some low-hanging branches which nearly got caught in Hermione's hair before the open side of the lake came into view. It was a perfect picturesque setting of the castle on high, the moon behind it, and the reflection of both on the calm lake before them. Harry's senses noticed it was something of a play. There was a spell on the water that seemed to calm it to let the reflection appear clean, and the air seemed charged with a spell to break up the cloud cover. Although Harry knew how they pulled the look off, it was no less impressive. The boats pulled up to a small dock where everyone was able to get off. Harry was impressed at the spell that prevented the boats from rocking when they got off, as it was one that he didn't recognize. They followed a short path which led to an enormous door, and once they approached, it opened to reveal a stern-faced elderly woman. Hagrid waved behind him and said, "The first year's Professor McGonagall." Thank you, Hagrid, I will take them from here. The professor led them up some marble stairs to another large door and welcomed them to Hogwarts. She gave a brief introduction of the point system, which made Hermione frown at the confirmation of a lack of purpose behind the point system. Harry heard the redhead who had been clinging to them since the boat say something about a troll, and McGonagall moved to open the doors. Harry quickly took off his glamour necklace, causing his hair to change from dirty blonde to black. Only Hermione and Neville noticed, but before either could say anything the door was open and they were led into the Great Hall. In addition to the hundreds of students sitting on 4 very large tables were a half-dozen or so see-through grey spirits floating through the air above the tables. The Hogwarts Ghosts. They flew to the crowd of new students with their interests piqued, and each conveyed their wish that the students would join their houses. McGonagall arranged the students in a line before getting out a stool and a hat. Once the hat was placed on the stool, it started to sing a song Harry doubted he would remember. At the end there was applause and McGonagall called, "Abbott, Hannah." The young girl in question walked up to the stool and sat down before the hat was placed on her head. A few moments of silence passed before the hat shouted, "Hufflepuff." One by one each student was shorted. Neville and Hermione got sorted into Gryffindor, and both were waiting to hear when Harry was going to be called. After Sally Ann Perks had been sorted, McGonagall froze. Silence echoed for a moment, barely hidden by the emerging whispers of confusion. From the tallest seat at the head table, the old man Harry figured was Dumbledore said, "Minerva?" The professor unfroze from the shock of the name and after a cough called out, "Potter, Harry?" Harry nonchalantly walked up to the stool as if he had not been publicly declared dead a year ago. McGonagall robotically placed the hat on his head as she had no idea what else to do. Interesting blocks you have here. Well, nice of them to let me through." "Ah, been to the other side, have you?" "That's a first." Harry thought, "You're not going to tell anyone, are you?" "Certainly not, your secrets are yours and yours alone to tell. Though there is much about your power you do not understand yet, but I can tell you are up to the challenge." "Oh yes, I can tell you seek challenges like a bird seeks the sky." "Certainly ambitious. However, a Slytherin certainly wouldn't choose hell mode." "No, that's a Gryffindor if I've ever seen one." "Think I'm going to die?" "Oh, most certainly, there are at least 4 things in this castle looking to kill you at the moment, and that number will likely double in 2 or 3 months. I'd level up if I were you, and don't skimp on the exercise and practice." Harry felt like he wanted to cry as the hat shouted, "Gryffindor." The table of red and gold was the first to break the silence and shouted louder than any other time that night, welcoming Harry to their house. Harry moved to sit with Hermione and Neville, who were both giving an excellent impression of a fish at the reveal of his name. Like everyone else, Harry's robes changed from unaligned to his house colors once he sat down. Harry felt someone giving him a death glare and looked over to the head table. Dumbledore and most of the other teachers were shocked. The one Harry recognized as his mother's old acquaintance Severus looked like he'd seen a ghost, and the man in the turban, which somehow blocked his energy sense, seemed non-committal about it, though he was looking in Harry's direction. McGonagall continued the shorting while several of his new housemates started bombarding him with questions, starting with Hermione, of course. "Are you really Harry Potter?" Harry honestly answered, "From the day I was born to the day I died." That threw most of them off, and Neville used the pause to ask, "I thought you had glasses and a scar." Harry lifted his hair out of the way to reveal the faint image of his scar. Harry answered back, "I got my eyes fixed and my scar started healing a year ago." A brown-haired girl leaned over the table and argued, "Cursed scars don't fade, that's why they're called cursed scars." Harry shrugged. He honestly had no idea why his scar didn't fade before and why it faded after he died. Once the last student was sorted, Dumbledore stood up and said, "Let the feast begin." Harry noticed a build-up of exotic energy over all the tables at the word feast, and it flashed at the word begin. James had told him that Hogwarts was filled with house elves who did things like this. They were the ones who made food appear and vanish and cooked and cleaned. Harry turned around and noticed several masses of exotic energy that hadn't been there before positioned along the walls. The masses were skinny and only a meter or so high. Invisible house elves, perhaps? Harry turned back to the food and started filling his plate with potatoes and meats. Though technically unnecessary, he would face awkward questions if he didn't eat, and it was not as if the act of eating was unpleasant. "Oh, biscuits, I'll take 3. Harry did his best to either avoid, be purposefully vague, or be misleading on many of the questions he was asked, and the only time he told the truth was in a situation where he would absolutely not be believed. "Why'd they say you blew up last year?" asked the redhead. Because if they said I detonated through magical implosion, most people wouldn't understand. At some point the invisible elves flashed their magic and the mostly empty dinner plates were replaced by plates containing desserts. After a few more minutes and those too had been taken out. Dumbledore stood up once more and announced, "Now that we are all fed and watered, I must once more ask for your attention, while I give out a few notices." Dumbledore took a sip from his cup before he started listing off an assortment of objects which seemed to now be banned from the school. As ever, I would like to remind you all that the forest on the grounds is out of bounds to students, as is the village of Hogsmeade to all below 3rd year. I must also tell you that this year, the 3rd floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death. Harry immediately declared to himself under no circumstances would he ever venture into that corridor. Since decomposing into energy and reconstituting himself from energy were both unimaginably painful, having a very painful death meant if he was killed there, he'd face 3 consecutive terrible pains instead of the usual 2 per death. Dumbledore continued, "It is also my painful duty to inform you that the Interhouse Quidditch Cup will not take place this year." A dozen or so shouts of complaint arose from each table, the loudest of which originated from a pair of identical redheads from his own table. This is due to an event that will be starting in October, and continuing throughout the school year, taking up much of the teachers' time and energy, but I am sure you will all enjoy it immensely. I have great pleasure in announcing that this year at Hogwarts we are to have the honor of hosting a very exciting event over the coming months, an event that has not been held for over a century. It is my very great pleasure to inform you that the Triwizard Tournament will be taking place at Hogwarts this year. Harry paled as he remembered what Rockshire had told him about expecting the unexpected. He hoped he was overthinking it, but his doom announced itself in the next moment. Ping. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.